The storm came out of nowhere, a wall of black clouds swallowing the horizon as Flight 234 bucked through the Pacific sky. Mark gripped the controls, sweat beading on his forehead, shouting over the roar of the engines. "Hold on, we're going down!" Lightning split the darkness, illuminating the terrified faces of the passengers. Lisa, clutching her medical bag. Tyler cursing under his breath. Emma wide-eyed and silent. Carl braced against his seat. The plane shuddered, metal groaning, then plunged, spiraling toward the ocean below. Impact was a blur of screams and shattering glass. Mark came to with salt water stinging his eyes. The cockpit half submerged, waves lapping at his legs. He stumbled out, coughing, onto a white sand beach littered with wreckage. The plane's tail jutted from the surf like a broken spine, smoke curling into the dawn sky. "Anyone alive?" he yelled, voice hoarse. Lisa staggered up, her arm bleeding, dragging her bag. "Over here!" Tyler emerged next, suit torn, spitting sand. Emma crawled from the fuselage, shaking, while Carl limped over, clutching a salvaged flare gun. 5 survivors, battered but breathing, stood amid the chaos, the storm retreating as fast as it had struck. "Where the hell are we?" Tyler muttered, scanning the horizon. No ships, no planes, just endless water and a dense jungle stretching inland, its canopy a tangle of green and shadow. Mark checked his radio. Static crackling. "No signal. Charts don't show an island here. We're off the map." They salvaged what they could. Food packets, a first aid kit, a few bottles of water, and set up camp near the wreckage. The beach was pristine, the air thick with salt and something sweeter, like overripe fruit. Lisa patched up cuts, her hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. "We need water. This won't last." Carl nodded, hefting a machete from the wreckage. "Jungle's gotta have a stream. Let's move." "Whoa," Tyler grumbled but followed, while Emma stuck close to Mark, her optimism flickering. Maybe someone will find us soon. The jungle swallowed them as they pushed inland, vines snagging their clothes, the air growing humid and heavy. Birds called, sharp, staccato cries, but no wings fluttered. Mark hacked at the undergrowth, unease prickling his neck. "Feels like we're being watched." A rustle snapped through the trees, loud and close. They froze, eyes darting. "Just the wind," Tyler said, but his voice shook. Then Emma pointed. Tyler's backpack, left at camp, hung from a branch 10 feet up, swaying gently. "How'd that get here?" They found a stream an hour later, clear water bubbling over rocks, and filled their bottles. Lisa knelt to wash her hands, then froze. "Look at this." Beneath the surface, a fish floated, dead, its eyes gouged out, flesh shredded like something had clawed it apart. "That's not normal," she whispered. Carl scouted ahead, machete raised, and called back. "You ought to see this!" They pushed through a curtain of vines into a clearing dominated by an ancient temple. Crumbling stone, draped in moss, its walls etched with carvings. Multi-limbed figures danced across the surface, their eyes hollow, mouths gaping. At the center, a pedestal held a glowing stone, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. "Holy crap," Tyler said, stepping closer. "This thing's gotta be worth a fortune." Before anyone could stop him, he grabbed the stone, its light flaring in his hand. The air shifted, colder, and a low hum vibrated through the ground. Emma clutched Mark's arm. "Put it back, Tyler," but he smirked, pocketing it. Finders keepers, back at camp. Dusk painted the sky blood red. They ate scavenged fruit, the silence broken only by the surf. Lisa stitched Carl's leg, her fingers trembling. "Something's off." "That temple, it didn't feel right." Mark nodded, staring at the jungle. "Yeah, too quiet now." The bird calls had stopped, replaced by a stillness that pressed on their ears. Tyler fiddled with the stone, its glow casting shadows on his face. "You're all paranoid." This is our ticket out. A twig snapped beyond the firelight, sharp as a gunshot. They jumped, peering into the dark. Who's there? Carl barked. Flare gun raised. No answer, just the rustle of leaves, rhythmic, like breathing. Emma hugged her knees, whispering. I saw something. Eyes, red, out there. Mark grabbed a flashlight, sweeping the beam across the trees. It caught a symbol carved into a trunk, 3 jagged lines, fresh, sap dripping like blood. What the hell? He muttered. The beam flickered, then died, plunging them into gloom. Footsteps crunched closer. Slow, deliberate, circling the camp. Lisa's breath hitched. That's not an animal. Tyler stood, stone in hand, shouting, Back off! The footsteps stopped, and a whisper slithered through the air. Mine, low and guttural, chilling their bones. Carl fired the flare, a streak of red arcing into the jungle. It lit up a shape. Tall, shadowy, limbs twisting unnaturally, before vanishing into the dark. Emma screamed, scrambling back, while Tyler dropped the stone, its glow pulsing faster. What was that? The whispers grew, overlapping. A chorus of mine, mine, mine. Shadows stretched across the sand, too long, too thin to be theirs. Mark grabbed a jagged piece of wreckage, heart pounding. We're not alone. Night closed in, the fire sputtering as the island woke up. Hungry, watching, waiting. The night after finding the temple stretched long and cold, the fire at camp flickering weakly against the dark. Mark sat watch, clutching his jagged piece of wreckage, eyes scanning the jungle where the flare had lit up that twisted shadow. Lisa huddled by the flames, her medical bag open, stitching a gash on Carl's arm from a jagged branch. We need to leave at first light, she said, voice tight. This place isn't safe. Tyler paced, the glowing stone still in his pocket, its light pulsing through his shirt. You're overreacting. It was just some animal. But his bravado cracked when a low growl rumbled from the trees, shaking the sand beneath them. Emma jolted awake, her sleeping bag tangled. Where's Tyler's backpack? It was gone again. Shredded straps scattered across camp, the stone untouched inside. Something took it, she whispered, eyes wide. Mark stood, flashlight dead in his hand. Stay close. We're not splitting up. But as he spoke, a shadow darted behind the wreckage. Fast, too tall for a man. Carl aimed the flare gun, finger twitching. Show yourself. The growl came again, closer, wet and guttural, like something drowning in its own throat. Tyler froze mid-step, the stone slipping from his pocket. It hit the sand, glowing brighter, and the whispers returned. Mine, 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 swirling around them. A crunch snapped through the dark, footsteps circling, heavy and deliberate. Mark swung his weapon, shouting, Back off! But the shadows thickened, swallowing the firelight. Then Tyler was gone. 1 second he stood by the wreckage. The next his scream tore through the night, cut off by a sickening snap. Lisa bolted up, flashlight flickering to life, its beam catching a trail of blood leading into the jungle. The stone lay abandoned, pulsing like a heartbeat. He's gone, Emma sobbed, clutching Lisa. Mark grabbed the stone, shoving it into his pack. We're moving. Now. Dawn broke gray and heavy, the survivors abandoning camp, trekking inland toward the temple. Mark led, the stone a weight in his pack. Lisa and Emma stumbling behind, Carl guarding the rear with the flare gun. The jungle pressed in, vines curling tighter, branches snapping without wind. It's following us, Carl muttered, glancing back. Footprints appeared in the mud, clawed, too wide, vanishing as they watched. Lisa stopped, gagging. A deer hung from a tree, gutted, its eyes gouged out, blood dripping into a puddle below. That's fresh, she said, voice trembling. A rustle shook the leaves above, and something wet splattered on her shoulder. Dark, sticky, not rain. She wiped it off, hand shaking, and found it smelled of rot. Emma screamed, pointing at a tree trunk, words carved deep into the bark reed. Return what is mine, the sap running red like blood. Mark gripped the stone tighter. It wants this back. We're giving it. The temple loomed ahead, its stone walls slick with moss. They entered, the air cold and stale, the carvings seeming to shift in the dim light, limbs stretching, mouths widening. Mark set the stone on the pedestal, its glow flaring, then dimming. There, done, done, done. A roar shook the chamber, deep and furious, rattling dust from the ceiling. That didn't work, Carl said, flare gun raised. Shadows bled from the walls, pooling into a shape. Tall, amorphous, red eyes glowing like embers. It lunged, claws slashing, and Carl fired. The flare streaked red, hitting the creature's chest, flames licking its form. It screeched, retreating into the dark, but the ground trembled, roots snaking up through the floor. Out! Mark yelled, shoving Lisa and Emma toward the exit. Carl followed, but a root coiled around his leg, yanking him back. He screamed, hacking at it with a machete, sap spraying like blood. The creature loomed again, its form shifting, now humanoid, now spider-like, its jaw unhinging with a crack. Claws tore into Carl's chest, ripping through flesh and bone. He gurgled, blood bubbling from his mouth, then went still. Mark dragged Lisa and Emma out, the temple collapsing behind them, dust choking the air. Carl's screams echoed in their ears, his body lost to the rubble. They ran, jungle blurring past, until they hit the beach, collapsing near the wreckage. We're down to 3, Lisa panted, tears streaking her face. It's not stopping. Emma rocked, muttering, it's the island. It's alive. Mark stared at the trees, shifting subtly, closing off paths they'd taken. A whisper hissed through the leaves. Mine. And a shadow flitted across the sand, too fast to track. Lisa clutched her head, wincing. I keep seeing it. In my dreams? Red eyes, claws. She trailed off. Eyes glassy. Mark shook her. Stay with me. We're building a raft. We're getting out. They scavenged wreckage. Metal sheets, ropes, working fast as dusk fell. Footsteps crunched behind the trees, circling, louder now. Mark teed planks together, hands shaking, while Lisa bandaged a cut on Emma's arm. A growl rolled over the beach, low and wet, vibrating the sand. Emma bolted upright, screaming, It's here! The flashlight beam caught red eyes. Close, unblinking. Then they vanished. A bloody handprint smeared across the wreckage. Fresh, human-sized, but clawed. Thoughts, Carl's, Lisa whispered, voice breaking. The raft took shape, crude but buoyant. Mark dragged it to the surf, waves lapping at his knees. Get on! But as Lisa climbed aboard, Emma froze, staring at the jungle. It's calling me, she said, voice flat, stepping toward the trees. Emma, no. Lisa lunged, grabbing her arm, but Emma twisted free, running into the dark. Her scream pierced the night. High, desperate, then silence. Mark pulled Lisa onto the raft, shoving off. We can't save her. We can't save her. The ocean stretched black and endless, the raft bobbing on the waves. Lisa sobbed, clutching the edge, while Mark paddled with a broken seat. The island shrank behind them, its silhouette jagged against the sky. It can't follow us here. A splash rocked the raft, something heavy hitting the water. Mark swung the flashlight, its beam catching a shape beneath the surface. Long, shadowed, circling. Red eyes broke the waves, glowing, then sank. It's not done, Lisa whispered, her voice hollow. The jungle's edge lit up. Flames, faint but growing. A figure stood on the shore. Emma motionless, her eyes red, grinning too wide. Whispers carried over the water. Mine, mine, mine. Fading as the island burned. But the dread lingered, cold and sharp. The raft bobbed uselessly on the black waves, the island's burning silhouette taunting Mark and Lisa as Emma's red-eyed figure vanished into the jungle. The creature's shadow circled beneath the water, its growls rumbling through the hull. "We can't outrun it," Mark said, voice tight, gripping the broken seat he'd used as a paddle. "We have to end this." Lisa's eyes were wild, her hands trembling. "End it? With what? We've got nothing left." But Mark pointed to the shore, jaw set. "The temple. That stone started this. We finish it there." They paddled back, the surf crashing against them, the creature's red eyes breaking the waves, closer each time. Sand crunched underfoot. As they hit the beach, abandoning the raft, the jungle loomed. Trees shifting like sentinels, roots curling toward them. A whisper hissed through the leaves. "Mine." Sharp and furious. Mark scavenged a jagged metal shard from the wreckage, handing Lisa a spear-like branch. He hit it hard and fast. She nodded, gripping the wood, her knuckles white. The temple wasn't far. Its mossy spires jutted above the canopy, glowing faintly from the stone within. A roar shook the ground as they pushed through the vines, the air thick with rotten salt. Footsteps thudded behind, heavy, wet, gaining fast. Mark swung his flashlight, catching a glimpse. Long, shadowy limbs twisting, red eyes blazing. "Run!" "Shadowy limbs twisting, red eyes blazing," he yelled, shoving Lisa ahead. The temple's entrance gaped like a maw, the pedestal inside pulsing with the stone's light. Mark skidded to a halt, Lisa beside him, panting. "They burn it," he said, pulling a lighter from his pocket, salvaged from Carl's gear. "Destroy the stone, maybe it stops." Before they could move, the creature burst in, a nightmare of shadow and bone, 10 feet tall, its form shifting, now humanoid with claws, now a mass of writhing tendrils, its jaw unhinged, teeth glinting like knives, red eyes glowing with hate. A guttural roar split the air, shaking the walls, dust raining down. Lisa lunged, spear thrusting at its chest. It swatted her aside, the wood snapping, sending her crashing into the carvings. She screamed, clutching her side, blood seeping through her shirt. Mark swung his shard, slashing its arm. Black ichor sprayed, sizzling on the stone floor. The creature screeched, claws slashing back, grazing his shoulder, tearing flesh. "It's not enough!" Lisa yelled, scrambling up. She grabbed a fallen torch from the debris, lighting it with Mark's lighter. Flames flared, casting wild shadows. The creature recoiled, its eyes narrowing, but it lunged again, tendrils snaking toward her. Mark tackled it, driving the shard into its side. It roared, thrashing, slamming him against the pedestal. The stone toppled, cracking on the floor, its glow flickering. Lisa thrust the torch at its face, flames licking its shadowy form. It shrieked, a sound like metal grinding retreating toward the back wall. "Keep going! Going!" Mark shouted, grabbing the stone. He smashed it against the pedestal, once, twice. Cracks spiderwebbed across it, light pulsing erratically. The creature howled, its body convulsing, tendrils lashing out. One caught Lisa's leg, yanking her down. She stabbed it with the torch, burning it free, the stench of charred flesh filling the air. The temple trembled, roots breaking through the floor, coiling toward them. "It's the island," Lisa gasped, dodging a tendril. "It's fighting back." Mark raised the shard, driving it into the stone's core. It shattered, light exploding in a blinding flash, then dying out. The creature froze, its roar turning to a wail. High, piercing, rattling their skulls. Its form unraveled, shadows bleeding into the cracks, red eyes dimming. The roots stilled, the temple's hum fading to silence. It collapsed into a heap of ash and ichor, the air heavy with its decay. Mark dropped to his knees, chest heaving, blood dripping from his shoulder. Lisa crawled over, torch extinguished, her side slick with red. "Is it over?" she whispered, voice raw. He nodded, staring at the ash. "Yeah, it's done." The jungle outside quieted. No whispers, no footsteps, just the distant crash of waves. The temple's carvings seemed to fade, the walls slumping as if exhausted. They staggered out, leaning on each other, the beach stretching before them under a gray dawn. The wreckage smoldered, the raft half sunk in the surf. "We beat it," Mark said, but his voice lacked conviction. Lisa clutched her side, wincing, her eyes darting to the trees. A faint rustle stirred the leaves, soft, almost nothing. Mark tensed, shard raised, but no shadow moved. "Just the wind," he muttered, lowering it. Lisa didn't answer, her gaze distant, fixed on the jungle's edge. The silence felt wrong, too still, too empty. The island watched, its presence lingering like a held breath. They'd won, but at what cost? 3 were gone, and the air carried a whisper too faint to hear, yet there, teasing the edge of their minds. The temple's silence was deafening as Mark and Lisa stumbled out. The dawn sky a dull gray over the unmapped island. Mark's shoulder bled through his torn shirt, the jagged metal shard still clutched in his hand, slick with black ichor. Lisa limped beside him, her side bruised and bloody, the broken torch dangling uselessly from her grip. The jungle stretched before them, its trees still, too still, after the chaos. "We did it," Mark rasped, his voice raw, glancing at the ash-streaked temple behind them. "It's over." Lisa didn't respond, her eyes locked on the beach ahead, the wreckage smoldering in the surf. Her breath hitched, a faint tremble in her hands. "It doesn't feel over," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face, streaked with dirt and blood. A rustle stirred the leaves, soft, fleeting. Mark spun, shard raised, heart pounding, but the jungle stayed empty. "Just the wind," he muttered, lowering his arm. Lisa's gaze lingered on the trees, her lips parting like she'd heard something he hadn't. They reached the beach, collapsing near the half-sunk raft. The waves lapped at the wreckage, washing away scraps of metal and blood. Mark scavenged a water bottle from the debris, cracked but holding a few sips. He handed it to Lisa, who drank, wincing as it stung her cracked lips. "3 gone," she said, voice hollow. "Tyler, come on, all for that damn stone." Mark nodded, staring at the ocean. "We survived. That's what matters." But his words felt thin, swallowed by the island's oppressive quiet. A shadow flickered in the surf, brief, shapeless, then vanished. He blinked, shaking it off. A faint buzz broke the silence, growing louder, a helicopter's rotor slicing the air. Mark scrambled up, waving his arms, shouting, "Here! We're here!" Lisa grabbed a flare from Carl's pack, firing it skyward, a streak of red arcing against the gray. The chopper banked, its spotlight sweeping the beach, pinning them in its glare. It landed on the sand, rotors whipping their hair. A medic jumping out with a stretcher. "You hurt?" he yelled over the noise, eyeing their blood-soaked clothes. Mark nodded, helping Lisa aboard. "Plane crash! Something attacked us." The medic frowned but didn't press, strapping them in as the chopper lifted off. The island shrank below, its jungle a dark smear, the temple's spire a jagged tooth against the horizon. Mark pressed his face to the window, relief washing over him, until he saw it. A figure stood at the tree line, motionless, too far to make out. Red eyes glinted, then winked out. "Did you see that?" he asked, turning to Lisa. She stared ahead, hands clenched in her lap. "See what?" Her voice was flat, her eyes distant, reflecting the chopper's dim lights oddly, almost glowing for a split second. Mark rubbed his face, chalking it up to exhaustion. Hours later, they were in a hospital off the mainland. Antiseptic replacing the jungle's rot. Mark lay in a bed, shoulder stitched, IV dripping into his arm. Lisa sat across the room, her side bandaged, staring at the wall. A nurse bustled in, checking charts. "You're lucky to be alive," she said, shaking her head. "No record of an island there. Must have been uncharted." "Lucky," Mark echoed, the word tasting sour. He glanced at Lisa, who hadn't spoken since the chopper. "You okay?" She nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Too wide, too stiff. "Just tired," she said, but her fingers twitched, tracing invisible patterns on the bed. A cop came by, notepad in hand. "Mind telling me what happened?" Mark recounted the crash, the temple, the creature, words tumbling out, sounding crazier with each breath. Lisa stayed silent, eyes fixed on the floor. The cop scribbled, skeptical. "Well, check the site, but sounds like stress and wildlife. Get some rest." Night fell. The hospital quiet save for the hum of machines. Mark drifted off, dreaming of red eyes and shifting shadows. A scream jolted him awake. Lisa, thrashing in her bed, clawing at the air. "It's in me," she yelled, voice raw, before nurses rushed in, sedating her. Her eyes locked on his as she slumped, glowing faintly red, then dimming. Morning brought discharge papers. Mark hobbled out on crutches, Lisa trailing behind, her movements stiff, mechanical. "What you mean?" "It's in me," he asked, stopping by the parking lot. She turned, her smile stretching wider, unnatural. "Nothing. Just a nightmare." A chill ran down his spine. He noticed a scratch on her arm. Fresh 3 jagged lines like the carvings on the trees. "Lisa," he started, but she walked past, heading for the street. "You need air," she said, voice low, layered with something not hers. He watched her go, the hospital's fluorescent glow fading into the dusk. A whisper drifted back. Mine, soft, guttural, carried on the wind. Mark's heart sank. They'd escaped the island, but something had come with them, buried deep in Lisa, waiting to wake. Mark stood in the hospital parking lot, crutches digging into his armpits, watching Lisa disappear into the dusk. Her shadow stretched too long across the pavement, her steps too smooth, too quiet. That whisper, "Mine," lingered in his ears, cold and guttural, sinking into his bones. He shook his head, hobbling to his car, the keys trembling in his hand. "She's just shaken up," he muttered, but the lie tasted bitter. Back at his apartment, the city buzzed outside, horns honking, lights flickering, normalcy that felt like a mask. He collapsed on the couch, shoulder throbbing, the TV droning news about a missing plane. No mention of the island, no trace of flight 234. He grabbed his phone, scrolling through contacts. Lisa's name stared back, uncalled. A text popped up, unknown number. "Look behind you," his breath caught. Head snapping around. Nothing but shadows on the wall, shifting faintly. Sleep came fitful, plagued by red eyes and Lisa's warped grin. He woke to a thud, his crutches fallen, rolling across the floor. The TV flickered, static buzzing, her voice leaking through. "Mine. Mine." He yanked the plug, heart racing, but the whisper echoed in the silence. Days blurred into weeks. Mark dug online, no sleep, forums, anything. Finding whispers of unmapped islands, cursed stones, creatures that take root in survivors. A post chilled him. It doesn't let go. It spreads. Attached was a blurry photo. A woman with glowing eyes, smiling too wide, vanishing into a crowd. Lisa. He called her, voicemail clicking on. Lisa, it's Mark. Where are you? Static answered. Then her laugh. Low wrong, layered with that growl. The line cut dead. That night, his mirror reflected a scratch on his neck. 3 jagged lines. Fresh. Bleeding. No, he gasped. Scrubbing it raw, but it stayed. A month later, news broke. A hospital orderly found dead. Eyes gouged. Chest clawed open. Mark's gout twisted. The address was Lisa's last known spot. He drove there, parking across the street, watching. She emerged from an alley, pale, her grin splitting her face, red eyes glinting under the streetlight. A man followed her, dazed, then vanished into the dark. Mark's phone buzzed. A video, no sender. It showed Lisa on the island, standing over the temple's ash, her voice chanting, "Mine." The creature rose behind her, merging into a shadow, its claws hers now. The screen went black, his reflection staring back, eyes flickering red. Just for a second, he dropped the phone, backing away. She'd brought it back, not just in her, but in him. The island wasn't done. It never would be, out there. Lisa walked free, spreading its hunger, and Mark felt it stirring, whispering in his blood.